It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
Bizarrely behaving snowstorms in the eastern U.S., bomb cyclones in the U.S. West, and we have just been officially told that all of the lower 48 U.S. states are in some stage of drought. All of them. What's wrong with this picture? More to come on these subjects. First, a puzzle piece from EULawEnforcement.com. Preparing the European Union for a Geoengineering Future, exploring the interplay of EU and international law in geoengineering. The report continues, the question of geoengineering governance encompasses more than just legally binding rules. While it must create legal certainty and establish political legitimacy, it can also fulfill pragmatic functions such as coordination. Co-regulation can also be considered for regulating geoengineering. Co-regulation encourages the active engagement of relevant stakeholders, including scientists, engineers, environmental experts, and representatives from industry and civil society. Stop. Correction to all that this previous report just stated. Climate engineering operations, aka weather warfare, serves only those who print and provide the funding for these operations, the global controllers. If you think their concern is the welfare of you and I and our posterity, think again. From the UK Guardian, let's add this. Far-right militia targets U.S. military over baseless hurricane weather weapon claims. The Guardian report states, veterans on patrol, VOP's acronym, conversations reveal that members believe the, quote, outlandish conspiracy theory, Guardian states, that the U.S. government steered the Hurricane Helene with weather manipulation technology, that the U.S. is spraying the American people with toxic elements. No, our government would never do that, would they? The Washington Post report from 1977 stating even that far back, on the record, U.S. military had already conducted no less than 239 open-air biological tests on innocent, unknowing U.S. civilians. Business as usual. The Guardian reporter then used the term insane conspiracy theories in a desperate attempt to try and marginalize anyone that dares to question the shockingly visible climate engineering atrocities in our skies. Final excerpt from the Guardian report. These conspiracy theory claims were further amplified by the likes of far-right broadcaster Alex Jones. Let's stop there. For the record, obviously political labeling is just more mass distraction. It's interesting that in CNN's version of attacking Alex Jones and myself, because Alex and I were having an exchange on climate engineering, CNN never once made mention of Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of climate engineering. Of course, CNN's total omission of any Geoengineeringwatch.org mention is no surprise. The last thing that Matrix media mass distraction minions want is for their listeners to find a credible source of data on the subject of climate engineering, aka weather warfare. Moving on, more from CNN. Forgive me, but many factors are now so dire that even the liars are sometimes forced to acknowledge reality. Here's the headline. It's not just you. Fall hasn't really felt like fall this year, and it's a sign of things to come. The CNN report then states summer-like warmth has been eating away at the fall in the United States this year, and as the season continues to wither in a warming world. If you feel cheated out of crisp autumn weather this year, CNN states, no, you're not alone. This fall is on pace to be one of the warmest, if not the warmest, it is the warmest, on record across the lower 48. An analysis of preliminary data from NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, Centers for Environmental Information shows the average temperature across the lower 48 this fall is more than 7 degrees Fahrenheit above normal as of November 15th. The warmest fall on record before this was 2016 at 4 degrees above normal. Let's repeat that. Fall in the U.S. in 2024 has been 7 degrees above normal, and that's officially. Unfiltered frontline temperatures are higher still. How many times have I stated on this broadcast and others that conditions, including uncensored temperatures, are far worse than what we've been officially told? Trees are not naturally dropping their leaves when they should due to the conditions just described. Thus, in specific fall rains, the climate engineers are including synthesized plant hormone defoliants to force deciduous trees into dormancy to create the illusion of a change of season. Seen any deciduous trees that are fully foliated with stone-dead leaves that can hang on the tree all winter? If the tree is in a sheltered location and the wind doesn't blow the leaves off? Geoengineeringwatch.org has done extensive testing working with the University of Minnesota. We're not speculating about what's coming down in our rain. Final excerpts from CNN. Without adequate rain and with persistent heat baking the ground, drought is impacting every lower 48 state, according to the latest data from the U.S. Drought Monitor. Some states have experienced a flash drought, or when drought conditions become quite severe in a short time frame. New Jersey is a prime example, they say. The state had zero drought at the start of fall, and now the entire state is at least in moderate drought. Yes, so-called flash drought, now the norm. Again, this reminder, devastating drought and deluge scenarios are the hallmarks of climate engineering operations. More on the lack of normal leaf fall from KSLnews.com. Why are so many trees still full of leaves? The report says many Utah trees are still full of leaves, which could be a problem, they say, if the state gets a decent snowstorm. They continue to reduce the weight on branches, clipping leaves from the trees or using a leaf blower to see if any leaves will drop off. Can help, they say. So there's your solution. Never mind planetary meltdown with toxic climate engineering operations further fueling the overall fire. Just cut off the leaves from your trees. Cut off the branches of your trees. Use a leaf blower, or just do what some branches of our government now recommend. Cut all your trees down. No more worries. Not about snowfall or firestorms. Problem solved. So long as long-term survival isn't on your agenda. More harbingers of what's to come from SciTech Daily. 130-year-old record broken in Mount Fuji, which I covered in a previous broadcast. And this report states it's bare again after fleeting snow. The report says the volcano's first snow of the season fell in early November, the latest snowfall in 130 years of record keeping, only to vanish within a few days. What a surprise. This is typical with the desperation of the power structures and the climate engineers to try to create the illusion of still functioning planetary climate systems when they're completely broken, and climate engineering is further breaking them by the day, along with many other forms of human activity, by the way. Let's remember, it's not a this or that equation, it's an all the above. Back to the wild weather roller coaster in the U.S. from the UK Daily Mail. Urgent warning in 3 states after bomb cyclone set to hit region. The National Weather Service, NWS, alerted residents in Northern California and Oregon and Washington to potential hurricane-force winds, catastrophic flooding, they say, and feet of high elevation snowfall this week. The report continues. Americans living in these areas, like me, are advised to find shelter in an interior room on the lowest floor of a sturdy building and avoid cars and mobile homes. It sounds like the world's coming to an end weather-wise here right now, doesn't it? Couldn't be further from the truth in my location. I'll elaborate in a moment. Oregon and California can expect at least 6 inches of rain, with over 20 inches possible in the mountains. Bomb cyclones form when a mid-latitude storm rapidly intensifies over a 24-hour period. They then say it's rare for a storm to lose 70 millibars of pressure this quickly. Stop. Contraire. It's not rare anymore. Consider ionosphere heater-induced atmospheric pressure zone manipulation. Not speculation, hard science. Anyway, so much sensationalization, which is so useful for the global controllers, often overhyping U.S. weather events while completely ignoring ongoing and accelerating global and environmental catastrophes. And my location in the wilderness on the east side of Lake Shasta, in spite of high wind warnings repeatedly, the wind was almost completely still through most of this entire scenario. Yes, we had significant rainfall, but nothing historically unusual. And certainly for them to make this out as if it's some sort of once in a multi-decade event, the data's not there for that. And we've seen repeatedly in the past when they've done this exact kind of hyping, if you will, they'll show the same picture of the same flooded region over and over, as if that's a portrayal of the entire state or the entire West Coast. We need to look below the surface, and it doesn't mean that they can't create such catastrophic scenarios anytime they want, because they can. Here's more from further east in the U.S., also from the UK Daily Mail. Denver snow. They do this to Denver a lot, as I've stated in many broadcasts. Denver sits in a basin, so chemical ice nucleation in the cold, dense layer of air it creates sits in that basin, and they can create all the sensationalized headlines they want. So here we go. Denver snow, record-breaking November snowfall ahead of new storm. They like those kind of headlines, the controllers and the climate engineers. Here's a point to consider and remember. If you're forced to drive on the chemical ice nucleated, surfactant-soaked frozen material that we're told is just good old-fashioned snow created by nature, be extra careful. This artificially nucleated, surfactant-soaked frozen material is generally extremely slick, much more than any naturally nucleated snow. Surfactants are what makes soap soap. Surfactants are used to keep the climate engineering seeding elements from coagulating together as they're being dispersed from geoengineering jet aircraft. So in summary, be extra careful if forced to drive on the super slick surfactant-soaked snow, and definitely don't eat it. There is much more than just surfactants in this chemically frozen concoction falling from our skies. More on engineering winter from MSN. Winter storm this weekend could, quote, crumble airports for Thanksgiving. They say Mother Nature is throwing another wrench into everyone's travel plans. A widespread winter storm is expected to bring freezing temperatures, harsh winds, and lots of rain and snow. Yes, just Mother Nature. So says MSN. If you're willing to face what most are too afraid to even investigate, search and review the Engineering Winter section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. You won't like what you learn, but it is going on in our skies. This is Dane Wigington. You're listening to the weekly installment of the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News Report, the end of the world as we know it broadcast, brought to you by geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of global climate engineering operations, aka weather warfare. Reaching a critical mass of awareness is the only way forward in this fight. We can and we absolutely must reach a critical mass of awareness. Starting a conversation on climate engineering that leads people to a credible source of data is one way. Geoengineeringwatch.org will continue all of our efforts to be the go-to source on covert climate engineering operations. About a conversation on climate engineering, it can easily be started with geoengineeringwatch.org awareness-raising materials available on our homepage. Our only goal with offering these materials and our printed materials at less than our cost of producing and shipping, our only goal to bring this issue to light and to a halt while we still have something left to salvage of our planet's life support systems. Please help us to sound the alarm. Next, very bad and getting worse news, another glaring harbinger of climate engineering, the drought part of the engineered drought deluge scenarios. NASA satellite reveals abrupt drop in global freshwater levels. That's from phys.org. An international team of scientists using observations from NASA and German satellites found evidence that Earth's total amount of fresh water dropped abruptly starting in May of 2014 and has remained low ever since. Reporting in Surveys in Geophysics, the researchers suggested the shift could indicate Earth's continents have entered a persistent drier phase. Again, there's no legitimate discussion about climate anything without first and foremost addressing and acknowledging climate engineering, period. From 2015, the report says through 2023, satellite measurements showed that the average amount of fresh water stored on land, which includes liquid surface water like lakes and rivers, plus all water in aquifers and underground, was 290 cubic miles. This is 1,200 cubic kilometers lower than the average levels from 2002 through 2014. One of the study authors and a hydrologist at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenville, Maryland, stated that that's 2.5 times the volume of Lake Erie lost. The report continues. During times of drought, along with the modern expansion of irrigated agriculture, farms and cities must rely more heavily on groundwater, which can lead to a cycle of declining underground water supplies. How could it not, right? Freshwater supplies become depleted, rain and snow fail to replenish them, especially when the snow tends to sublimate because it's been chemically nucleated, and more groundwater is pumped. This reduction in available groundwater puts a strain on farmers and communities, potentially leading to famine, conflicts, poverty, and an increased risk of disease when people turn to contaminated water sources. This is according to a UN report on water stress published in 2024. For the record, the word potentially is wrong. Inevitably is correct. It's already underway in dozens of countries around the world. More from the report. The team of researchers identified this abrupt global decrease in fresh water using observations from the Gravity Recovery and Climate Experiment, that's the GRACE project, GRACE satellites, operated by the German Aerospace Center, German Research Center on Geosciences, and NASA. GRACE satellites measure fluctuations in Earth's gravity on monthly scales that reveal changes in the mass of water on and under the ground. The report then states this: global warming leads the atmosphere to hold more water. Been over that on this broadcast many times, 7% more for every degree C of warming, which the report says results in more extreme precipitation. Not always, not with geoengineering. In fact, geoengineering can worsen the extreme precipitation and eliminate precipitation altogether. The report says long periods between intense precipitation events allow the soil to dry and become more compact. That decreases the amount of water the ground can absorb when it does rain. They then say the problem when you have extreme precipitation is the water ends up running off instead of soaking in and replenishing groundwater stores. Globally, freshwater levels have stayed consistently low since the 2014-2016 El Nino, while more water remains trapped in the atmosphere as water vapor. Warming temperatures, the report says, increase both the evaporation of water from the surface to the atmosphere and the water holding capacity of the atmosphere, increasing the frequency and intensity of drought conditions. Climate engineering particles are desiccants. When you put too many particles in the sky, one, you're blocking direct sunlight, which thwarts evaporation. You're changing convection, which affects evaporation. And the particles themselves, again, can absorb atmospheric moisture. That's why so many regions don't have dew anymore. There's no dew except right after a storm. But that atmospheric moisture is not descending now. Climate engineering is a part of that equation as well. It's completely thwarting the entire global hydrological cycle, period. This report then says, while there are reasons to suspect that the abrupt drop in fresh water is largely due to global warming, it can be difficult, they say, to definitively link the two. This is a statement from Susanna Worth, a hydrologist and remote sensing scientist at Virginia Tech, who was not affiliated with the study. She continued, there are uncertainties in climate predictions. Measurements and models always come with errors. Susanna, look up toward our jet-sprayed, filth-filled skies. There's your uncertainty. There's your model error. How willfully blind and programmed can the so-called science community be? Final excerpt from the report. It remains to be seen whether global freshwater will rebound to pre-2015 values. No, don't hold your breath on that. Or they say hold steady or resume its decline, considering that the 9 warmest years in the modern temperature record coincided with the abrupt freshwater decline. A report author also stated this: we don't think this is a coincidence. Well, that's easy to conclude, and it could be a harbinger of what's to come. End quote. Stop. Correction. What is already occurring is nothing compared to what's coming. Another from phys.org. Groundwater pumping drives rapid sinking in California, study shows. Been over this in previous broadcasts. This is an update. Researchers and water managers have known that sinking, technically termed subsidence, has been occurring over the past 20 years, longer than that. But the true impact was not fully appreciated because the total subsidence had not been quantified. Yes, yet another case of, gee, we just didn't know, from the so-called science community. Here's a point they forgot to mention also. Toxic chemicals are building up in the lower levels of aquifers. None of this bodes well for the human race. Moving on from the Washington Post. Why the U.S. has gotten so dry so fast and what could reverse it. I'll tell you exactly what would reverse it. Stop interfering in the global hydrological cycle. The Post article says, it may sound counterintuitive, but this year's hyperactive hurricane season may have helped fuel the drought across the United States. Wait, what? The Post continues, during October, about 72% of the planet experienced above average amounts of atmospheric moisture, a trend toward more water vapor in the atmosphere. That's consistent with the warming world. So is precipitation. Should be precipitating. Why is it not? Because climate engineering has put so much particulate matter into the cloud moisture. If you have too many small particulates in cloud moisture, the droplets don't combine and fall as rain. And this is part of solar radiation management. So we have days now in many regions of featureless, rainless skies, no sun. Welcome to solar radiation management. Welcome to climate engineering. Welcome to the planetary asylum. Final excerpts from the Washington Post report. There was apocalyptic flooding in Spain, a powerful typhoon in Taiwan. There's been many of those. Get to that shortly. And Hurricane Milton in Florida. Hurricane Helene, which broke records for moisture content across 6 states, was also a good example, they say, of what happens when storms harness extra moisture and then rainfall is more destructive. So why, might you ask, did parts of 40 states experience well below normal rainfall from August through October? Question mark. How much rain will be required to break the dry trend? Question mark. The answer, they say, might surprise you, and it's at least partly connected to this year's hyperactive hurricane season. Really? Do they make it up as they go? Short answer, yes. Just like the recently named dozen or more new cloud types that they want us to believe no one ever noticed before, right? No mention of the climate engineering elephant in the sky on any of this or any mainstream reporting on climate anything. From the New York Times, this is the Northeast entering its wildfire era, question mark. The report says sudden and extreme shifts from wet to dry seasons will become increasingly common as the world heats up, experts said. They continue, the weather whiplash we've seen is more likely to happen in a warmer world. Stop. Much worse than that is already unfolding. Wait and see. And in the case of wildfires, regardless of the source of ignition, what is setting the template for these fires to burn with such ferocity? And that is, without question, climate engineering. Affecting precipitation, toxifying ground microbiome, root systems, killing trees from the bottom up, covering the foliage with an incendiary dust, and these particles are incendiaries. Aluminum is such a powerful incendiary, it's used in military demolitions. Aluminum nanoparticles. Climate engineering is inseparable from firestorm anything. Source of ignition, again, separate subject. What's setting the template for these fires to burn? Please search the Engineering Wildfires section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. From Yahoo News, farmers raise concerns after staple crop becomes increasingly harder to grow. A quote from a farmer in this report, "I don't remember this happening before," end quote, because it hasn't. For the record, crop production is collapsing around the world with few exceptions. From the Washington Post, grocers report egg shortage ahead of holidays amid surging bird flu. From that report, avian influenza has affected more than 108 million poultry in 48 states since 2022, lifting prices and diminishing supply. That's just the beginning to this story. Wait and see. Later this week, this news brief, avian flu confirmed in 62 more California dairy farms as virus strikes more poultry. And in regard to all the pesky pathogens that just keep popping up, new from livescience.com, dengue fever is coming. Climate-fueled rise in cases will affect the U.S., scientists warn. Yes, the manipulators of the matrix plan to put much more on the menu for the masses. Corporate media and power structure-owned so-called scientists would like us all to believe that the never-ending parade of pathogens is just nature being bad. Pay no attention to the hundreds of level 4 biolabs all over the world whose job it is to manipulate such concoctions. Also, never mind the fact that polymer fibers and graphene are now part of the plethora of toxic materials in our rain. Both elements, polymer fibers and graphene, are used militarily as biological carrier platforms. Translation: to carry a biological weapon from the clouds to the ground. And there is this to consider. As I've mentioned many times on this broadcast, we have new listeners, so I'm bringing it up again. Never mind the fact that the world's second most recognized climate engineer, Dr. Ken Caldeira, who is also a former Department of Defense scientist, admitted in his own words, we have the recording at geoengineeringwatch.org, that one of his functions for the DoD was to design methods of spraying pathogens into clouds in order to infect the populations below. Imagine that. And lastly, let's not forget this quote from former U.S. presidential advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski. Quote, word for word, "In early times, it was easier to control 1 million people than to kill 1 million. Today, it is infinitely easier to kill 1 million people than to control 1 million." End quote, word for word from former U.S. presidential advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski. Oh, forgive me, almost forgot. Again, this reminder, stated earlier, the Washington Post report that disclosed the fact that even as far back as 1977, the U.S. military had already conducted a minimum of 239 open-air biological tests on innocent, unknowing U.S. civilian populations. How many have they conducted since? Business as usual. So, do all these puzzle pieces connect? You decide. There's more. Back to the control the food supplies, control the populations equation. From Yahoo News, Russian farmers ditch wheat for other crops after heavy losses. The report says such decisions will have a direct implication for global wheat prices and inflation. This is just the beginning. The dominoes are beginning to fall, and it will accelerate rapidly from here. You can quote me on that. From the UK Guardian, quote, I have lost everything, end quote. Southern Africa battles hunger amid historic drought. From that report, crops have failed in multiple countries, with 27 million people at risk of hunger, according to the World Food Program. Southern Africa is in the midst of its worst drought in at least a century. It's the worst ever. They always want to pretend it's happened before, so people think it can't be that bad. It is. With 27 million people affected and 21 million children suffering from malnutrition, according to the World Food Program. Mass carnage is a given in this equation, and it is just getting started. And it's not just the weather warfare, collapsing climate, other forms of human damage to the planet, global conflict, all the above. The human race clearly is not ready to survive itself. Guardian article then states an unprecedented El Nino-induced dry spell. Again, can't talk about climate in anything without addressing climate engineering, which lasted almost 2 months from late January in the middle of what should have been the region's rainy season, wiped out more than half the harvest in some countries. Why is the U.S. military all over in Africa? Why they even have their own control name, AFRICOM? Countries brought to their knees with climate cataclysm, governments forced to allow U.S. occupation. That's how it works. From Yale Climate Connections, climate change is spoiling food faster, making hundreds of millions of people sick around the world. They say the World Health Organization estimates 600 million people a year already suffer from foodborne illness. When you saturate the planet with highly toxic nanoparticles, I mean total ubiquitous contamination. We now know from peer-reviewed study there's not an uncontaminated drop of rain on planet Earth, and you annihilate all beneficial microorganisms. What happens? Bad things. And this is part of it. What happens when you kill your own microbiome by taking antibiotics? Fungal infections ensue. The planet's just a bigger version. More from The Guardian. Levels are dropping. Drought saps Zambia and Zimbabwe of hydropower. The report says vast human-made Lake Kariba is at near record low, causing daily power cuts and devastating African economies. Drought, deluge scenarios, hallmark of climate engineering. The climate engineers decide where it rains, when it rains, and how toxic that rain will be. Don't forget that. And again, when the climate engineers do allow toxic rain to fall, increasingly often in the form of devastating deluges, do drought-stricken, dying, and dead forests magically spring back to life? Not so much. About the deluge part of the engineering drought deluge scenarios from BBC. Dying of thirst as climate-driven floods mix with oil. From that report, herders scooping murky water from a small pond in a grassland in South Sudan are well aware of the dangers they face if they drink it. A former oil engineer has told BBC World Service that flooding in the area is washing pollution into water everywhere. Drill, baby, drill, right? As long as it's in somebody else's country or somebody else's backyard. To hell with the consequences. Final BBC statement. Large swaths of South Sudan have been underwater for several years after unprecedented flooding, which scientists say has been worsened by climate change. Total omission of climate engineering. Can't talk about climate anything without discussing climate engineering first. Keep that in mind. From the New York Times, where glaciers melt, the rivers run red. From the report, as the glaciers of South America retreat, the supply of fresh water is dwindling rapidly and its quality is getting worse. Correction, not just getting worse. Unfit for consumption, dead fish, dead wildlife. How long does any rational person think that any of this can continue? And in the land down under, Australia, this new report from news.com.au, severe heat wave burst to thrash majority of Australia over weekend. They say the southern parts of Australia are ready to be smashed by an intense heat wave with temperatures soaring up to 15 C above the November normal. That's almost 30 degrees above normal. While the northern and western parts of the country are battling severe thunderstorms, intense lashings of rain and flash flooding, drought, deluge, high pressure heat dome, record temperatures, there are so many layers to this, so many components of climate engineering. It's imperative to have some understanding of all of them, to have a basic understanding of what's unfolding. Flash drought, flash flood, climate engineering, all are inseparable. So as Lake Shasta begins to fill again from the climate engineering gift of toxic rain, search geoengineeringwatch.org, California drought, how to party on the Titanic. Short video that we did at geoengineeringwatch.org. I think you would find that very shocking in light of the last 2 years of, quote, rainpocalypse. And we still had unreported record dry before these bombogenesis rains just came in. It was record dry. My pond's record low, soil moisture record low, fuel moisture record low, and none of it's being reported. It doesn't matter how much rain fell in a calendar year if it fell in a condensed period of time, and then the climate engineers completely sucked all the moisture out of the atmosphere with their desiccant particles, thus sucking it out of foliage and soils. It was record drought here before this current toxic deluge. At the video I just mentioned, again, California drought, how to party on the Titanic, take a good look at what the bottom end of the drought deluge cycle just was, and soon will be again. And perhaps use a search engine other than Google for Geoengineering Watch anything, because Google's doing their best to censor and hide everything from geoengineeringwatch.org. About our last remaining forests and climate engineering-induced firestorms, how are we to protect ourselves? The U.S. Forest Service has a plan. Just cut down all the trees. Problem solved. From Oregon Public Broadcasting, this: more logging is proposed to help curb wildfires in the Pacific Northwest. U.S. officials would allow increased logging on federal lands across the Pacific Northwest in the name of fighting wildfires and boosting rural economies. How much economy do you have on a dead planet? Again, as I've said in the past few weeks, when someone says it's the economy, stupid, answer: the environment is the economy, stupid. So the study continues. The report continues as it states that, again, cutting down forests would boost rural economies. And they say these changes were proposed to a sweeping forest management plan that was already in place for 3 decades, and they're going to change that, of course, by deciding to cut down much more forest. The U.S. Forest Service proposal would overhaul the Northwest Forest Plan that governs about 38,000 square miles in Oregon. The proposal could increase annual timber harvest by potentially more than 200%, according to a draft. The number of timber-related jobs would increase accordingly. Cutting more trees would help reduce wildfire risk and make communities safer, they say. For the record, many entities are routinely making a mint also from the aftermath of firestorms, so-called salvage logging. Follow the money. In all these cases, follow the money. How much will it help our chances of survival to cut down remaining forests to very temporarily increase local economies? How much sense does that make? How moronic is that in reality? Let's add this recent report from CNN. Spain is being punished again. Thousands evacuated as parts of Spain hit with nearly a month's rainfall in 1 hour. Yes, again, more rain on the way. The report states, how dare Spain disagree with the policies of a certain country and government that I'm not allowed to mention? Just a coincidence? Hard to tell. Do some research, decide for yourself. If you haven't seen film footage of what happened in Valencia, take a look. From Yale Climate Connections, Category 5 Super Typhoon Manyi hits the Philippines. The island nation endures its 4th typhoon in less than 2 weeks. For the record, the Philippines also not cooperating with certain global powers. Just a coincidence? Again, you decide. You're listening to the weekly installment of Global Alert News, the Bad News Broadcast, installment number 485, November 23rd, 2024. This is Dane Wigington, your host. Global Alert News is brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of climate intervention operations known as geoengineering. Recordings of the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News broadcast can be found on the homepage of Geoengineeringwatch.org under the recent column and on the Dane Wigington YouTube channel. I want to express my deepest gratitude to all those that are marching forward in this fight. It's our collective efforts that can still make a difference at this late hour. If you're on our email list, please put us on your email contact book so that our mailouts don't go to the spam files. Please help us to share the groundbreaking documentary, The Dimming, which fully exposes the climate engineering atrocities. Over 25 million views on YouTube, thanks to all of you. The best way to share is by circulating the direct link to the dimming by email directly from the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. Sharing directly helps us to overcome social media censorship. When viewing our YouTube of the dimming or Global Alert News or any other Geoengineering Watch video on YouTube, please subscribe, share, and comment, all of which helps us to circulate critically important data to a much wider audience. About reaching those that still aren't looking up, here's one way. Start a conversation with Geoengineering Watch awareness-raising materials, which can be found on our homepage. Our only goal to provide activists what they need to move this fight forward. Extremely high-quality printed materials with shocking images. A picture's worth 1,000 words, as the proverb goes. We have Geoengineering Watch hoodies to go with our new Geoengineering Watch shirts. Photos of both are on our homepage. We have scannable business cards, bumper stickers, all effective tools to help strike up a conversation on the climate engineering issue. I commonly wear my Stop Climate Engineering shirt to Reading, and it does start conversations. People wonder what that's all about. Reaching a critical mass of awareness on the climate engineering onslaught. That's the great imperative of our time. If we can expose it, we can stop it from the inside out by awakening those who are involved, who are being told they're doing something benevolent, which couldn't be further from the truth. And when their families know what their family members participating in, we have a chance of stopping these programs from the inside out. If you're willing to share a picture of yourself with a Geoengineering Watch shirt or hoodie, ideally in some crowded location, please send your photo to us so that we can post it as part of our activist compilation. That's now part of our materials page. The images encourage others to make their voices heard in this all-important battle to sound the alarm. And to all those that are steadfastly committed to exposing and halting the climate engineering onslaught, you have my deepest gratitude now and forever. Again, it's our collective efforts that can yet make a difference at this late hour. About Europe, from Severe Weather Europe. Winter storm alert. Prepare for intense weather across Europe. The report states a major weather pattern change is finally coming up for Europe. An Arctic blast will spread from the north, leading to a significant and progressive pattern. Translation: engineering winter with atmospheric pressure zone manipulation and patented processes of chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding. That's what's happening. The report continues. This new pattern developing multiple intense winter storms that will rapidly move across Europe. Heavy rain, heavy snow, and blizzards are forecast. Again, translation: scheduled. The so-called forecasters are reading scripts. Literally, that's the case. In the U.S., Raytheon and Lockheed Martin does all the weather modeling for the nation's weathermen. Why would they need private defense contractors, aka geoengineering contractors, to do their weather modeling? Because the weather makers need to have the narrative coherent and matching. So those who schedule the weather events must make the script. But many would ask, why wouldn't the nation's weathermen at National Weather Service and NOAA say something? Because there's an illegal federal gag order on both agencies for any agency operations. That's why. Isn't that a massive red flag? Why in the world would our government feel the need to gag the nation's weathermen if they didn't have something incredibly huge to hide? The Severe Weather Europe article continues. After weeks of blocking high pressure, again, ionosphere heater created high pressure dome over the European continent, the weather change is here. The new schedule. The rest of November will be characterized by a much more dynamic weather pattern with multiple intense winter storms crossing the continent. But engineered winter weather whiplash comes at the ultimate cost of an even worse overall planetary meltdown. Keep that in mind. And with that in mind, from the New York Times, climate science can't keep up with the warming planet. No, they can't. Can they? Nor can they keep up with the shockingly in-our-face climate engineering operations that have been raging in skies for over 75 years. No, not condensation, sprayed climate engineering dispersions, as volumes of film footage, photos, and lab testing prove conclusively. Please search geoengineeringwatch.org, many categories, volumes of data. There's no rational denial of this taking place in our skies. Here's more. From CBC Canada, why has Earth been so unusually hot for the past 2 years? Question mark. Climate scientists are trying to figure that out. Report says NASA climate scientists say it's frustrating not to have answers. Our power structure-owned scientists are good at not having answers, aren't they? Scientists are having a meeting in 2 weeks where they may try to reach a consensus as to just why this warming is occurring. Yes, they just can't figure out what part of the equation they're missing. Can they? From SlayNews.com, Al Gore melts down during angry global warming rant at UN Climate Change Conference. That's the COP conference at an oil-producing nation. No plans to change any businesses there. They simply, I'll get to that. Former Vice President Al Gore unloaded in an angry tirade about global warming during an address at the United Nations Climate Change Conference. What a hypocrite Al Gore is. What an absolute hypocrite. Part of the power structure. He's done exactly what they wanted him to do, by the way. Make people hate him so much to take the exact opposite position of anything Al Gore says because they hate him so much. So if Al Gore said it was day, they would say it's night. That's why we have so many people denying the planetary meltdown, because they hate Al Gore. That's not a rational reason to deny reality. It's not. They continue during a speech at the UN COP29 event in Baku, Azerbaijan, again, oil-producing nation. Gore raged about polluters and demanded that the general public obey climate science as he flew in on his private jet, I'm sure. The COP29 summit started Monday as globalists from around the world gathered to make proposals for advancing the green agenda. The event has featured speakers who propose taxes on the meat and dairy industry to fight global warming. And again, I'm sure they all flew in their private jets. And the only thing they do at these conferences is behind closed doors to force nations to actively or passively participate in climate engineering. That's what they're really about. The human race, or so many elements in the human race, continue to behave ever more insanely as the moment of impact draws near. On that note, from CNN, giraffes are up next on the endangered species list, U.S. wildlife officials say. Declaring a species endangered is the most severe level of threat under the law, indicating that a species is at imminent risk of extinction. Newsflash, if the human race remains on the current course, all life is on the same list, including us. From phys.org, scientific models trust the land to soak up lots of CO2. The reality is a lot more messy. End of headline. Let's correct that headline. That's not reality. The land is not soaking up the CO2. It's emitting it now. What was carbon sinks are now carbon sources because forests around the world are dying. The ocean is dying, Earth's ocean, and there's only one because it's all connected. This report says, is it possible to heat the planet to dangerous levels and then to cool it down later? ? Economic models, they say, charting the world's path to net zero emissions, say yes. Let's stop there. Of course, not a single mention of the climate engineering atrocities, again, that are killing the entire planet. And for the record, this report of pacifying hopium is patently false. We are through the guardrail. There's no going back. This is all Pollyanna, total public pacifying nonsense. Moving on, two sides of the same controller coin. First, from Scripps Institute News, logging on public lands has increased despite President Biden's forest protection efforts. No surprise here. Do as I say, don't as I do. It's all smoke and mirrors. Next, from the New York Times, carbon fuels are still winning. Global emissions head for a record high again. Countries promised to move away from coal and oil and natural gas at last year's climate summit. New research shows they're burning more than ever before. Again, it's about climate engineering. That's what those summits are about. Business as usual to the brutal bitter end. Drill and burn more. Climate engineer more till total collapse. But wait, many would say, green energy. It's going to save us from ourselves. Not so much. From econews.com, the largest project in history has begun. 52 billion solar panels to cover America. An exploratory initiative, more than 50 billion solar panels to be installed, greening the future towards the first ever photovoltaic highway. It's total delusion. In the same category as sun-blocking space mirrors, Brazil-sized space balloons to do the same, block the sun, covering the North and South poles with reflective tarps to keep them from melting, etc., etc. The list of unbridled, moronic proposals from the so-called science community is endless. And on this same theme of idiocracy, this week, Biden said, quote, no one can reverse the clean energy revolution, end quote. True, Joe, because it doesn't exist. Alternative forms of energy are better than straight-up incineration of carbon fuels. Yes, I've been off-grid for some 23 years with wind, hydro, and solar power. But climate engineering is greatly hampering all three forms of alternative energy. No so-called green organization says a word about it. That's what got me into this battle in the first place. I built my large off-grid home, wilderness of Northern California, large solar system, and I was losing half of my solar uptake from whatever these aircraft were emitting in our skies. I knew that couldn't be just condensation. And when I began to test my precipitation, I found what I didn't want to find. Copious amounts of climate engineering elements, and I've been in this fight ever since. What about EV trucks? They going to save us from ourselves? Not so much. New York Times, new pollution rules aim to lift sales of electric trucks. The latest in a string of ambitious climate regulations to clean up the heaviest polluters on the road. What an absolute joke. It says truckers be worried on the same headline. This is completely, absolutely untenable. You can't power these trucks with batteries. This whole scenario of the green revolution is just more nails in our collective coffins, and those that are all for the drill baby drill somehow think I'm advocating for that. I'm not. All of this is just more nails in our collective coffins. You can't live like we're living and expect to live very long. And we're about to find out the hard way how true that is. About electric vehicles overall, from transportationalternatives.org, electric cars won't save us. That's the name of that headline. Absolutely true. How many have seen the photos of an EV charging station with a diesel generator in the background that provides power for the so-called green car? And the same when you plug it into any house outlet, where's that power coming from? And there's a net loss. Many don't realize that. There's a net loss of power in all these conversions. From converting one form of energy to another, you're losing energy in each process. Canadian tar sand's a prime example. It's an energy net negative. It takes 1.4 units of energy to get one out of it. Why would you bother? Because they want a different form of energy. Total insanity. The human race, taken as a whole, is behaving as if it does not want to live long. From climatetax.org, going all renewable and electric could save us $4 trillion per year, they say. Net zero, they continue, could be reached in 10 years. Hard to find the words for this one also. Total fantasy, all of it, including the part about net zero in 10 years. Again, on the current course, we won't be here in 5 years. Don't believe that's possible? Doesn't matter. No level of denial or normalcy bias will stop what's already unfolding, and in the coming weeks and months that will become ever more clear. From CNN, Trump picks fracking company CEO as next Department of Energy Secretary. So much for draining the swamp. Again, people caught up in this election theater is designed to divide and polarize the population. In the meantime, the planet goes down in flames. No place to hide from what's coming. There's more from numerous sources. Trump's pick for fracker-in-chief will have a tough time pumping a lot more oil. And yes, that's true. He will. About oil. In the year 1900, it took the energy in one barrel of oil to get another 100 out of the ground. Now it's about 1 for 4. It's a 96% decline. How long can that last? Again, we're converting one form of energy to another at a net loss. This is a complete scenario of total insanity. From the Max Planck Institute for Chemistry, climate change and air pollution could risk 30 million lives annually by 2100. By 2100? Again, total disconnection from mathematical and statistical realities. If we remain in the current course, it's unlikely anyone will be here in 2030. We already face extinction rates of 200 to 300 species of plant, animal, and insect every single day. That's 15,000 times the background rate. How long does anyone think that could continue? And switching gears to really give an example of human insanity, there's this nugget from AP News and many other sources. Duct-taped banana sells for $6.2 million at art auction. Look it up. You have to look at this. It's a banana duct taped to a blank canvas sold for $6.2 million. This is a shocking to the core example of idiocracy as the whole of the human race and the entire web of life circles the drain. Turns out the zombie apocalypse isn't as fun as they said it would be. That's a message from the UK Guardian. A population numbed, dazed, present but not present. Had it happened overnight, it would be a science fiction horror movie. But if you looked up from your phone for long enough, you might notice it started already. Global conflict, the final fallback option for the powers that shouldn't be. Our entire reality could go sideways on any given day at this point. For over 20 years, I've desperately tried to sound the alarm. When biosphere collapse becomes impossible to hide, false flag events, pathogen releases and global conflict would commence and accelerate. On that note, from research.com, America has been at war 93% of the time since 1776. In any given year since 1776, there's about a 91% chance that America was involved in some war somewhere during that calendar year. Let's ponder this from the San Diego Tribune. In a real head-turner, the report states, 3 aircraft carriers sail out of San Diego Bay in one day. Question, where are they actually going, and why? As the near-term horizon becomes ever more ominous, the following should be deeply pondered. Timeless wisdom, a timeless rant from Mark Twain. This Twain essay is titled The War Prayer. The American writer, Mark Twain, wrote the following in the glow of America's imperial interventions, which are more blatant now than ever before, aren't they? Which makes this report timeless. Here it is. It was a time of great and exalting excitement. The country was up in arms. The war was on. In every breast burned the holy fire of patriotism. On every hand and far down the receding and fading spread of roofs and balconies, a fluttering wilderness of flags flashed in the sun. Twain continues, nightly the packed mass meetings listened, panting, to patriot oratory, which stirred the deepest deeps of their hearts, and which they interrupted at briefest intervals with cyclones of applause, the tears running down their cheeks all the while. In the churches, the pastors preached devotion to the flag and country, and invoked the God of battles, beseeching his aid in our good cause, in outpourings of fervid eloquence which moved every listener. Sunday morning came. The next day, the battalions would leave for the front. The church was filled. The volunteers were there, the young faces alight with mortal dreams, visions of the stern advance, the gathering momentum, the rushing charge, the flashing sabers, the flight of the foe, the tumult, the enveloping smoke, the fierce pursuit, and the surrender. Then home from the war, they imagined, bronzed heroes, welcomed, adored, submerged in golden seas of glory. The service proceeded. A war chapter from the Old Testament was read. The first prayer was said. Twain's timeless dissemination goes on. Then came the long prayer. None could remember the like of it. For passionate pleading and moving and beautiful language, the burden of its supplication was that an ever merciful and benign Father of us all would watch over our noble young soldiers and aid, comfort, and encourage them in their patriotic work. Twain's essay continues. An aged stranger entered and moved with a slow and noiseless step up the main aisle, his eyes fixed upon the minister, his long body clothed in a robe that reached to his feet, his head bare, his white hair descending in a frothy cataract to his soldiers, his seamy face unnaturally pale, pale even to ghastliness. He ascended to the preacher's side and stood there, waiting. The stranger touched his arm and motioned the minister to step aside, which the startled minister did. The stranger then took his place. Twain's essay goes on. During some moments, the stranger surveyed the spellbound audience with solemn eyes, which burned an uncanny light. Then, in a deep voice, he, the stranger, said this, I come from the throne, bearing a message from Almighty God. The stranger continued, God's servant and yours. The stranger surveyed the congregation. Your minister has prayed his prayer, but has he paused and taken thought? Is it one prayer? The stranger asked. No, it is two. One uttered, the other not. Both have reached the ear of him who heareth all supplications, the spoken and the unspoken. Ponder this, the stranger stated. Keep in mind, if you would beseech a blessing upon yourself, beware lest without intent you invoke a curse upon your neighbor at the same time. If you pray for blessings of rain upon your crop, which needs it, by that act you are possibly praying for a curse upon some neighbor's crop which may not need rain and can be injured by it. Again, the stranger stated, you have heard your minister's prayer, the uttered part of it. I am commissioned by God, the stranger said, to put into words the other part of it, that part which the pastor, and also you, in your hearts, fervently prayed silently and ignorantly and unthinkingly. God grant that it was so. You heard these words, grant us the victory, O Lord, our God. When you have prayed for victory, you have prayed for many unmentioned results, which follow victory, which must follow it, which cannot help but follow it. Twain's war prayer goes on. Upon the listening spirit of God fell also the unspoken part of the prayer, and he commends me to put it into words for you to hear. Listen. O Lord, our Father, our young patriots, idols of our hearts, go forth to battle. Be thou near them, with them in spirit. We also go forth from the sweet peace of our beloved firesides to smite the foe. Final paragraph of Twain's essay, The War Prayer. O Lord, our God, help us to tear their soldiers to bloody shred with our shells. Help us to cover their smiling fields with the pale forms of their patriot dead. Help us to drown the thunder of the guns with the shrieks of their wounded, writhing in pain. Help us to lay waste their humble homes with a hurricane of fire. Help us to wring the hearts of their unoffending widows with unavailing grief. Help us to turn them out, roofless, with the little children to wander unfriended the wastes of their desolated land in rags and hunger and thirst, sports of the sun, flames of summer, and the icy winds of winter, broken in spirit, worn with travail, imploring thee for the refuge of the grave, and denied it. For our sakes who adore thee, Lord, blast their hopes, blight their lives, protract their bitter pilgrimage, make heavy their steps, water their way with their tears, stain the white snow with the blood of their wounded feet. We ask it in the spirit of love, of him who is the source of love, of who is the ever-faithful refuge, a friend of all that are sore beset and seek his aid with humble and contrite hearts. Amen. After a pause, the stranger spoke again. You have prayed it. If you still desire it, speak. The messenger of the Most High waits. And this the final facetious sentence from Twain's war prayer. Quote, it was believed afterward that the stranger was a lunatic because there was no sense in what he said. Translation, no sense to those that can't or won't look past programmed ideology and bias from birth, for those that refuse to consider the true cost of empire, conflict, and carnage to the innocents all over the world. Yes, for those that have labeled themselves patriots, all too often blindly following the dictates of chaos, carnage, mass consumption, of empire, without a second thought. From long before the time of Twain, till the present day, the willfully blind behavior of far too many in the ranks of the masses has not changed. Now, again, add programming from birth, fluoride, countless other forms of contamination, including the climate engineering fallout from our skies. Is my criticism and Twain's somehow a form of advocacy for any other government? Absolutely not. To assume so is just more programming. Governments are all corrupt. It is simply a matter of scale. The ever-increasing drive for endless consumption can only be fed by the continued looting, pillaging, plundering, and polluting of the planet's last remaining life support systems till nothing is left, and nothing is left alive. Global climate engineering, weather warfare operations are a core component of this scenario of extremely near-term self-annihilation. How near-term? Many might ask. Again, if the human race remains on the current trajectory, mathematically, statistically, it is unlikely that anyone will make the end of the decade, this decade. If we have any chance of changing course, it will take all of us, not by participating and pretending that power structure orchestrated election theater is going to save us, but by a core understanding that we will all very soon be fighting for our lives as the planet's life support systems collapse, with completely out of control climate engineering, aka weather warfare, further fueling the entire process on top of an endless list of other destructive human activities. And the coming collapse doesn't need any help from now likely nuclear war, or an asteroid impact, or Hollywood alien invasions. Even if every form of destructive human activity were to stop this moment, with climate engineering at the top of the list, collapse is already baked in. We're through the guardrail, and there's no going back. And no, I won't dance around that reality, as the vast majority are so compelled to do. So why try at all, is the next retort from far too many. This is why. If by our collective efforts we have any chance of salvaging any part of the planet's remaining life support systems so that someone, anyone, might make it through what's coming, with the hope that they might possibly learn from the mind-numbingly self-destructive behavior of the current industrialized, militarized paradigm of self-annihilation, then we have to try. It's not an option. It's our absolute obligation. An example I've cited many times: if your child was trapped in a burning house and you knew you had almost no chance of saving them, would that stop you from trying with every ounce of strength and courage you could muster? What we now collectively face is no less dire, and our collective response to it should be no less ferocious. Check the activist suggestions link on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org for specific instructions on how you can help to move this most critical fight forward. If by our collective efforts we can alter the current course even slightly, we could at least buy time to perhaps then alter our course yet further, and that's worth fighting for. We owe this to our children. We owe it to the web of life. We owe it to our Creator. Please, please make your voice heard. Make every day count. Time is not on our side. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington from Geoengineeringwatch.org.